Veryovkina Cave. At 7,257 feet deep, it is officially the deepest known cave on the planet. Getting to the bottom isn't a day trip, it's an expedition that takes over 4 days, and you're rigging thousands of feet of rope just to make the descent. And a place this extreme, you just know it has some horrifying stories. Today, we're telling those stories. We start on the border of Russia and Georgia in a mountain range called the Caucasus Mountains. This range is already famous. It's got Europe's highest peak, Mount Elbrus, clocking in at 18,500 feet. But we're focused on a sub-range on the western side, in a region called Abkhazia, known as the Gagra Range. The mountains here are impressive, topping 11,000 feet, but the real action is happening underground. The whole range is mostly limestone. Over geological time, rivers carved it up, creating deep canyons and, more importantly, the deepest caves we know of. In fact, the Gagra Mountains are home to 4 of the world's deepest caves, and at the very top of that list is Veryovkina. Still having trouble picturing how deep 7,200 feet is? Try stacking 23 statues of liberties on top of each other. That's the scale we're dealing with. And you don't just walk up to it. The entrance is at an altitude of 7,500 feet. You have to climb a literal mountain just to get to the starting line. Once you're up there, surrounded by rocky cliffs, you find a pretty unremarkable hole in the ground. It's clearly a cave, but looking at it, you would never guess it drops for over a mile straight down into the earth. So, how does a super cave like this even form? It's a geological lottery that's been running for millions of years. The Gagra Range is what geologists call karst topography. Think of it as a giant brittle sponge made of limestone and dolomite. For eons, rainwater, which is naturally slightly acidic, seeps into tiny cracks in this rock. It's not a violent process, it's a slow, patient dissolution. The water eats away at the rock, following faults and fractures, carving a vertical labyrinth that just goes down and down and down. What makes this region special is the sheer thickness of that limestone, allowing the caves to reach these incredible depths before hitting a different kind of rock or the water table. But it's not just rock and water. These caves are isolated islands of evolution. When teams like Perovo go down, they aren't just adventurers, they're scientists. They're hunting for extremophiles, creatures that have evolved in total darkness, under extreme pressure, with almost no nutrients. We're talking about translucent insects, bizarre crustaceans, and bacteria that eat rock to survive. Life that doesn't play by our rules. This hunt for new life is a key reason why these explorers risk so much. When the entrance was first found back in 1968, a group of cavers only went down about 377 feet before turning back. Then, in 1983, a different team from the Perovo Speleo Club out of Moscow found it again. For the next 3 years, they pushed it, getting down to about 1,400 feet. But then, things went quiet. For reasons that are still unclear, no one seriously explored it again until the year 2000. Part of that 17-year quiet period wasn't just due to the cave's difficulty, it was its location. Abkhazia has a complex and troubled political history. After the fall of the Soviet Union, it declared independence from Georgia in 1992, which led to a brutal war. To this day, it remains a disputed territory, a partially recognized state supported by Russia, but claimed by Georgia. For nearly 2 decades, the region was unstable, isolated, and effectively a no-go zone for international scientific expeditions. This isolation meant that while other parts of the world were being heavily explored, the Gagra Range and its giant caves remained a blank spot on the map, a perfect place for a secret like Veryovkina to hide. Work started up again, but the real breakthrough didn't come until 2015, when they found a new shaft that unlocked the cave's true secret. Suddenly, between 2015 and 2017, the known depth just exploded, from 1,400 feet all the way to 7,200 feet. They also mapped over 10 miles of tunnels and passages. Finally, in March of 2018, they hit the absolute bottom, a subterranean lake where the cave meets the water table. This officially marked the depth at 7,257 feet, or 2,212 meters. 6 months later, in September, the Perovo team was back. This time, they brought along photographers Robbie Schoen and Jeff Wade to document the trip. This was the same world-class crew that had made all the major discoveries in this cave and others nearby. Led by Pavel Demidov, the plan was to go back to the bottom. They wanted to collect samples of potentially new species and check out some promising horizontal tunnels, all while Robbie and Jeff captured it on camera. Now, even in a simple cave you can get in and out of in a day, you're still bringing a decent amount of gear. But in a cave as massive as Veryovkina, the logistics are more like climbing Mount Everest. You've probably heard of the multi-camp system on Everest, right? Where climbers set up camps higher and higher to stock food, gear, and acclimatize? It's the exact same principle here, but down. The amount of equipment you need for a multi-day trip deep underground is just too much to carry in one go. Let's pause and really understand what this gear means. It's not just ropes and a backpack. This is a life support system for a hostile alien planet. First, your light. In the cave, there is no dark. There is the dark. A total, pressing, absolute blackness you will never experience on the surface. Your light is your life. You carry three. A primary on your helmet, a backup on your helmet, and a third in your pack. If all three fail, you are done. Second, your clothing. The temperature is just a few degrees above freezing, and it's 100% humidity. It's wet. Everything is wet. Cotton is a death sentence. You wear a base layer of fleece or wool, and over that a tough, waterproof nylon oversuit. In the wettest sections, you're in a full-on latex dry suit, like a scuba diver. Third, your climbing gear. This isn't rock climbing, you're climbing the rope. You have a descender to go down, controlling your friction, and to go up you use ascenders, mechanical clamps that grip the rope. One for your hand and one for your feet attached by a stirrup. You inchworm your way up the rope. It is exhausting, repetitive work. Finally, the psychological gear, the ability to control claustrophobia when you're squeezing through a tunnel so tight you have to exhale to move. The ability to manage the acrophobia, the fear of heights as you rappel into a black void 500 feet deep. And you never do this alone. Your life is in your teammates' hands. They check your knots. You check theirs. One person's mistake doesn't just cost their life, it can trap the entire team. Teams have to make multiple trips, hauling load after load of gear down in advance to set up for a safe attempt. Veryovkina is no different. It has a total of 6 permanent camps set up at different depths. From the entrance, you gear up, special suits, harnesses, helmets, and headlamps, and drop into the darkness. You move through a maze of tight tunnels and passages to hit the first camp, which is already 2,000 feet down. From that first camp, Robbie, Jeff, and the Perovo team kept going. It took them 4 days to reach Camp 6, all the way down at 6,900 feet. The journey was brutal. The temperature was just a few degrees above freezing. They crawled through mud, waded through water, forced themselves through impossibly tight squeezes, and rappelled down 100-foot shafts with nothing but black air below. The thousands of feet of rope they rigged were their only way in and their only way out. Finally, they stepped onto the flat, sandy floor of Camp 6, set up in a large horizontal tunnel. This would be their home base for the rest of the expedition. For the next 3 days, everything went exactly to plan. They explored from the camp, and they took Robbie and Jeff to see the lake at the very bottom. They described this stunning turquoise water, 50 feet long and 28 feet deep, sitting in a chamber of pure black limestone, a place that would be completely, totally dark without their lights. Then came day 7. 2 of the team members had to leave early to catch a flight home. As they were climbing out, they got to Camp 3 and found a ton of water pouring into the cave. A massive storm on the surface had triggered a flood pulse, sending thousands of gallons of water rushing in. You can't use radios inside these caves. The rock blocks the signal. So, cavers have to run a physical communication wire all the way down. The 2 climbers immediately tapped into the cable and warned the team at Camp 6 about the flood pulse heading their way. Down at the bottom, the team wasn't that worried at first. Flood pulses are a known risk in caving. A little bit of rain on the surface can translate to a ton of water underground. In heavy rain, that number is way, way higher. All this water bursts into the cave in huge volumes. But again, the Perovo group was world-class. Their plan was simple: monitor the water level and act accordingly. Camp 6 had been set up in what looked like a safe spot, away from the main vertical shaft. Plus, they were at 6,900 feet, while the cave's bottom was over 7,200 feet. For the water to even reach them, it would have to completely fill up 300 vertical feet of tunnels and passages below them first. About 30 minutes after that call, they heard it. It started as a faint rumble and slowly grew, like a train approaching. By the time it hit, the sound was a deafening roar. The entire cave was shaking like a constant earthquake. Robbie had just started breakfast. He and the others rushed out of their tents and looked toward the main shaft. What they saw was a fire hose of water pouring down. Robbie just stood there, his mouth open, and almost dropped his food. As the less experienced one, he was seriously concerned. But the Perovo team, they stayed calm. The camp itself was still completely dry. Fast forward 2 hours. The water is still roaring with no sign of slowing down. Then, one of the Russian team members notices a gurgling sound coming from a small hole near the tent. He tells the team leader, Pavel. Pavel agrees it's concerning. They decide to go check a nearby siphon to see how much the water table has risen. They're gone for about 5 minutes. When they get back and look in that same hole, Not only can they see water, it's rising so fast it's sloshing up the walls, about to spill out. The team member looked at Robbie, and Robbie said his face went completely white. That was the oh shit moment. Robbie knew instantly they had to leave. Not later. Right now. With the sound of the flood still deafening, all hell broke loose. No one had planned to leave that day, but now everyone was scrambling, packing only the most essential gear. Robbie and Jeff pulled on their latex dry suits over their fleece base layers, then slipped on their tough nylon outer shells and harnesses. Robbie had to make an awful choice. He left all of his camera equipment, tens of thousands of dollars worth of gear. He knew if he tried to save it, it would slow him down, and that could cost him his life, or his teammates' lives. He just pulled the memory cards from the cameras, stuck them in a Ziploc bag, and shoved it inside his suit. At least the pictures would be saved. With that, he yelled to the others that he and Jeff were starting the ascent, and they headed for the vertical shaft. This would be the last interaction they had with the Russians at Camp 6. The remaining members were still packing, waiting for their team leader Pavel before starting their own ascent. As Robbie and Jeff made their way to the ropes, they had to cross a narrow traverse, like a little bridge along the wall. Before the flood, the chamber next to this bridge was just 60 feet of empty air. Now it was a swirling lake with water almost coming up over the bridge. At the end of this traverse was the vertical rope, and it was hanging directly inside the waterfall. Robbie stepped into the torrent, clipped his ascenders to the rope, put his head down, took a deep breath, and just started climbing. He said it felt like the water was crushing and suffocating him, squashing his head into his shoulders. He managed to tuck his chin, which let the water run off his helmet and gave him a tiny air pocket to breathe. He just focused on the white rope right in front of his face, moving his ascenders rhythmically as fast as he could. He finally hit a small outcropping where he could step out of the main blast. He looked up, and his heart sank. The rope went up through a shoulder-sized hole in the rock, and that hole was also where the fire hose of water was coming from. It looked impossible. He thought, there's no way I can get through that. But he couldn't stop. He was the lead climber. Everyone else was behind him. He had to at least try. He got to the hole, and the force of the water was so strong he could only move his ascenders a few inches at a time. He fought his way through. He was so panicked he didn't even realize the next section of the cave was mostly dry. He was just climbing for his life, fueled by pure adrenaline, until Jeff yelled up at him to slow down. He snapped out of it, stopped, and waited. When Jeff caught up, his face was white, his eyes wide, but he just yelled, "Well, we're alive." The two of them stood there, silently wondering if the Perovo team below them could say the same. Robbie and Jeff made it to Camp 5 at 6,200 feet and waited, staring down into the abyss, just hoping. Then, a miracle. They saw a single headlamp slowly making its way up. When he got close, they saw it was Andre. He climbed into camp. They asked him, "Did you see the others?" He just shook his head silently. They all sat there, thinking the worst. What they didn't know was that by the time Pavel had gotten back from checking the siphon, that bridge they'd walked across was completely submerged. The rest of the team had to swim to the vertical ropes. Pavel was the last one out, and as he swam, the chamber had become a giant swirling whirlpool. He had to fight to make it to the line. By the time they were climbing, all the deeper passages were completely flooded. Then, 15 minutes after Andre, 5 more lights appeared. One by one, the entire Perovo team climbed up into Camp 5. Everyone was safe. Robbie was just in awe. One guy was even carrying a stove and 4 sleeping bags on his harness. Robbie thought to himself how glad he was that he and Jeff had gone first. If they had been the ones to climb up last, it's likely they wouldn't have survived. And the craziest part? The Russians climbed in, got in their tent, and were immediately making coffee and laughing about it. Robbie, on the other hand, was still thoroughly freaked out, and they weren't out of the woods. A horizontal passage 200 feet above them, which you normally have to crawl through half filled with water, was now completely submerged. They were trapped. As long as the water stayed high, they couldn't move. Pavel reassured them they'd wait. Over the next 16 hours, the roaring of the water finally died down. The entire flood pulse had lasted 20 hours. They learned later it was a week of soaking rain followed by one severe storm that had saturated the ground. A cab driver later told them the raindrops had been the size of nickels. This was a huge learning experience. They now knew the cave could flood this badly in the summer, not just in winter. Plans were made to improve surface monitoring and install another emergency camp in the lower chambers. And despite the expedition being cut short, they had actually done most of what they came for. They'd mapped new passages, gotten their samples, and thanks to Robbie's quick thinking, all the photos were saved. But that flood wouldn't be the last scary incident at Veryovkina Cave. 2 years later, in November 2020, some people in the area noticed a rope fixed at the cave's entrance. In the caving world, that's a huge no-no. It means any unprepared person can wander in and get hurt or lost. Fast forward 8 months to August 4th, 2021. The same Veryovkina team returned to continue their work. They descended as normal, but then, at 1,300 feet, they found a pair of crampons and an ice axe. This made no sense. This gear couldn't have just fallen this far. Someone had to have brought it down. They pushed on, past Camp 1, past Camp 2, and then, at 3,600 feet, halfway into the deepest cave on Earth, they found the badly decomposed body of a man. He was wearing camouflage overalls, boots, and a helmet. He had 2 cell phones, and he was still attached to the rope he'd used to get down. Based on the decomposition, he'd been there for months. Authorities identified him as 37-year-old Sergei Kozeyev from the nearby Russian city of Sochi. He was an avid outdoorsman, but he often went on solo expeditions. On November 1st, 2020, he said goodbye to his family like he always did and set off for the Gagra Mountains. He didn't tell them where he was going, even though he was heading to a location that fewer people have visited than the International Space Station. His phone told the rest of the story. He'd spent almost a year planning this. He'd printed out maps and reports from the Veryovkina team's own expeditions. He climbed the mountain, fixed his rope at the entrance, and descended into the darkness. Alone. He hauled 3 transport bags down using a simple lattice descender. He successfully reached Camp 1 and then Camp 2. Evidence suggests he lived at Camp 2 for about a week before trying to go deeper. The problem is, below Camp 2, the cave gets much more technical and much, much wetter. This is where proper equipment is literally life or death. The standard fleece and waterproof layers are crucial. We don't know his last moments, but it seems he realized his equipment just wasn't good enough for the wet sections. At that point, he would have tried to go back up, but because he was in such a technically challenging area, he ran into a fatal gear problem. Sergei had brought ascenders for his hands, but he didn't have any stirrups for his feet. He had no way to create footholds, no way to stand on the rope to climb the massive vertical shafts. He must have tried again and again to get back up, but between the exhaustion and the bitter cold, he eventually just laid down to sleep one last time and never woke up. When the Veryovkina team found him, they climbed back to the surface and alerted the authorities. The recovery effort was massive. It took a team of over 100 people. It's also incredibly risky to be in a confined space with a decomposing body. The gases can build up and become toxic. In the end, despite the number of people involved, the team had to dismember Sergei's body to successfully remove him from the cave. His body was finally returned to his wife and kids in Sochi. The stories of the 2018 flood and the 2021 tragedy are 2 sides of the same coin. They show the staggering impersonal power of this underground world and the intense, often fatal human drive to explore it. Sergei's story is a heartbreaking reminder that this is not a tourist destination. It's an active, dangerous, and unforgiving environment that demands world-class expertise. For decades, the title of Deepest Cave was a fierce battle, fought mostly between 2 nearby giants, Veryovkina and the Veryovkina Cave. For years, Veryovkina held the record. These teams, like Pavel Demidov's Veryovkina Club, were in a constant race against each other, pushing deeper into the black, 1 meter at a time. Veryovkina's 2018 discovery didn't just beat the record, it shattered it. But what drives a person to do this? It's not for fame. Caving is not a spectator sport. It's for the call of the void, the feeling of being the first human being to ever set foot in a chamber, to see a formation that has been growing in perfect silent darkness for 100,000 years. It's the same drive that sent explorers to the poles and astronauts to the moon. The surface of Mars is better mapped than the deep cave systems under our own feet. These explorers are the cartographers of Earth's last truly unknown frontier. For now, Veryovkina Cave holds the title of deepest on Earth. But the Earth is a big place, and unlike mountains, caves are hidden. Veryovkina only got that title in 2018. It remains to be seen how long it will hold that record, and what other horrors and wonders are still down there waiting to be found.